Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'll speak for 5 minutes and then I'll take questions. What is the best title given to any New Zealand legislation? My money is on the 1877 Education Act. It's an act to make further provision for the education of the people of New Zealand. So as early as the 1870s, there's a commitment to a united people belonging to and benefiting from the nation New Zealand. Nearly 150 years later, that commitment is under serious threat from those who would replace liberal democracy with tribal sovereignty, and by doing so, will create a racialized society, apartheid. Consider the two words, liberal democracy and their connection. Both give us something that none of our ancestors living in tribal kinship groups had. Democracy gives us a system of parliamentary sovereignty, of law, of regulation. It recognizes that our common humanity justifies equal rights. Those rights belong to the individual citizen, not to the group. The word liberal gives us the freedom to be different, either as individuals and in voluntary associations based on shared interests, which could include heritage, culture, language, sport, politics, religion, music, and so on. That is what makes liberal democracy remarkable. As citizens, we have the same political and legal rights. As members of civil society, we are free to be different. This is an enormously important point. It's the combination of rights, responsibilities, and freedom within democracy's governance and laws that makes the modern world vibrant and prosperous. That's why I support the Treaty Principles Bill, because it provides a coherent and succinct statement capturing what liberal democracy is. It's something we should all know, especially members of Parliament who represent us, the people of New Zealand. First world nations need liberal democracy's creative tension. It's an invigorating tension between rights, responsibilities, and between having the same rights and having the freedom to be different. The bill is the symbolic link to the hope found in both the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi and in the 1852 Constitution Act. 19th century New Zealanders, especially those who had been slaves, decimated by war, of low genealogical birth status, or from impoverished backgrounds, they put their faith in a peaceful and prosperous future for their descendants. In the 21st century, we can strengthen this faith for our descendants by agreeing to the principles in this bill. New Zealand's future may be that of a prosperous first world liberal democracy or a third world retribalized state. Yes. Our first world tribal nation is a contradiction in terms. It is not possible. There can be no prosperity without individual equality and freedom. There can be no social equality without prosperity. We are at a very serious crossroads. The value of the bill is that it not only forces us to confront this fact, but allows us to do so within the parliamentary select committee process, rather than through cultural posturing, intimidation, or perhaps even violence. The very existence of the bill is liberal democracy in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've got a few questions lined up. First one's from Dr. Webb, and then Takata, and then Timothy.
Well, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was fascinated that you used the Education Act of the 1870s as an example of liberal democracy. I'm assuming you've read it and you know that free and compulsory education wasn't available to Māori children until the 1890s, and that act only applied to Pākehā children. In light of that, I'm perplexed with your stance that there shouldn't be any kind of distinction or special duty to Māori, given the fact that the full rights of participating in the democracy were only just given, 100 years ago.
Your question there, Dr. Webb?
Yeah, there was. My question was quite clearly stated. Can you explain, given that Māori weren't given the rights of full citizenship in our liberal democracy, why it is that you seem to say there should be no differentiation in treatment between Māori and Pākehā?
Māori had government-provided education from the 1867 Native Education Act. The 1877 Act included everyone, except there was a provision for those who did not want to be compelled to attend government schools not to go. So you had the tribes of the north, the east coast, south and so on, very keen to establish schools. But that exemption recognised that there were some groups, particularly, of course, Waikato and Taranaki, who were opposed to the government given what had occurred during the land wars. That exemption enabled them not to have to send their children to school until the exemption was removed in 1903. Now, you will be aware, surely, that the 1877 bill had a number of exemptions. There were exemptions for children based on geographical locations, who couldn't get to school in some cases. There were exemptions for children with disabilities. There were a number of exemptions, and what I think that shows is something we see in the New Zealand character, which is an interesting combination of idealism and pragmatism. So throughout the 1877 Act, you will see a number of exemptions. Secularism, for example, there are other exemptions. And I think that is very much part of the tolerance required in a liberal society. There will always be some people who will simply refuse to do what the law says. And the pragmatic part of being a New Zealander is that our laws often have exemptions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's well addressed. We'll go to a question now from Dr. Ferris.
Kia ora, Elizabeth. I'm sure you'll recognise and agree with me that Māori had pre-existing rights before anyone else showed up. So my question to you is, where did those rights fit into the liberal democracy idea? And just secondly, can you identify for us all one modern day colonial society where the Indigenous people have thrived under the liberal democratic idea?
Oh, thank you. Yes, quick answer to your two questions. The first one is that in pre-colonial New Zealand, slaves did not have rights, nor did low caste tribal members. Now, in response to your second question, my answer would be New Zealand. Have a look at the burgeoning Māori middle class. Have a look at the numbers. Right from the 1960s, there has been a steady increase in the numbers of Māori moving into the middle class, who are doing very well, which is excellent.
Okay, thank you, folks. That's the time we've got for the session today. I just want to accept.
I feel, Helmut, you're about to sit down there and...
Now, in all honesty, I would love to have a conversation with that lady, because it's clear that she believes what she's saying. She's informed, she's thoughtful, but there are some things missing from her analysis, which I'd enjoy sharing with her and seeing what she did with them. So just real quickly, I agree with her that liberal democracy is, as far as, to date, it's the best thing anyone has conceived for enabling the kind of, Enlightenment values that the West, and including us, it's for the more part as Kiwis, we like. So, look, no problem with being a champion for liberal democracy. But the proposition that liberal democracy cannot exist while Indigenous rights and tribal, in our case, rangatiratanga, are being honoured, that's just bogus. I've actually shared with David that, the United States made provision in its constitution from the 1700s for the sovereignty of Indian nations, and that they have in very real terms applied that, particularly in recent decades. And is their liberal democracy breaking down? Yes, but got nothing to do with the Indians, Whānau. The other quick observation I'd make about her analysis was the repetitious insistence by her and supporters that citizens have the same rights. Yeah, okay, kia ora for that. So I won't recite the endless examples of provision where, in fact, citizens individually and collectively don't have exactly the same rights. But I will make one observation, because she was very pointed about the issue of individualism versus collectivism, and saying that all New Zealanders have the same rights. Well, what about New Zealanders who are dual citizens? So I actually, as a 20-something-year-old, my dentist talked me into getting the citizenship of my father's people. So I'm a German citizen and a New Zealand citizen. So I have rights available to me here in this land that any other who aren't Germans in this land, that's been negotiated between the New Zealand government and the German government, isn't available. Is that a problem? Is dual citizenship a problem? No, it's not a problem. It's just about clarity between polities and the rights that exist. Again, I could go on, but I would really love to pick apart her nonsense.
I actually had a former colleague.
One last thing on the Native Schools Act. The Native Schools Act made provision, and I've heard a quote from the minister of the day, to train the Māori, for the boys it is to be farmers, and for the girls it is to be wives of farmers. Nice one for equality there, whānau, kia ora.
I did have a former colleague. So put it this way, I'm 6 generations born in New Zealand on my mother's side. It's at least 4, and it could be up to 6 on my father's side. I don't know the full details on father's side, just my mother's side. But I had a colleague who was, half Māori, half British, born in the UK, looked Māori as anything. but he's a dual citizen.
Yep.
And the thing is, his trail was much better than mine. But as I say, his one is he's a British citizen by birth, he's a New Zealand citizen by descent. You know, and that brings in just as an other complex arrangement. I don't ask me, how did you manage to get dual citizenship with Germany? Because Germany don't tend to like duals. And one of my friends was up in New Plymouth, Daniela, 40 years in New Zealand before Germany would allow her to be a dual citizen.
Yeah, my dad couldn't get German dual citizenship. In his day, he had to relinquish it, but in my day, apparently they made it possible. The point is, it's not about no one is. Anyway, there are rights that accrue to the polity you belong to, and if there's a negotiated arrangement for the coexistence of the citizens of that polity, then that's the reality, and it's true for Ngāti Toa as it is for Germans.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook